afternoon. My name is Yusef M. Janey, and I'm sitting in today for our host, Al McFarlane, the publisher of Inside News and McFarlane Media. And I would like to take this opportunity to remind our listeners and viewers that they can support this program by tuning in to Inside News and the Conversation with Al McFarlane on YouTube. Go to your YouTube channel and subscribe to receive notifications when we are live. And we would really appreciate it because that helps us build our listenership, our viewership, and broadens the participation in the conversation. These are fascinating, timely conversations that cover topics that have tremendous impact in the African American community, not just locally, not just nationally, but frequently internationally. And we believe firmly that the only things you keep are the things you share. So you're subscribing to the program on YouTube, Inside News Minnesota, the Conversations with Al McFarlane program. We would really greatly appreciate it. And I want to say good afternoon to Angela Rose Myers, who is also a frequent contributor and participant on this broadcast. Good afternoon, Angela. How are you today?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good. We are going to discuss three distinct topics today, at least three. The first of which will be a Justice Department 90-page report on policing in Louisville, Kentucky, following the murder of Breonna Taylor in that city through a no-knock, no-announce warrant. We will also be carefully discussing the Netflix special Selective Outrage that Chris Rock did last Saturday that had a live pre and post segment to it. And we will also be discussing the death of two American tourists. Two were rescued in Matamoros, Mexico, who had gone down there for cosmetic surgery and got caught in the middle of a war. There's no better way to describe it, between two drug cartels. And they were kidnapped and then recently rescued or discovered. And one of the suspects in the kidnapping was also apprehended. So the Justice Department report on policing in Louisville following the death of Breonna Taylor, the Netflix special by Chris Rock, and also by Marlon Wayans, who did his own special. And we will be talking about these things this afternoon. We hope to be joined by Brother Yoji, all the way from Brazil, who is also a frequent contributor. And at this point, having introduced Angela Rose Myers and myself, Yusef M. Janey, we are going to proceed with today's program. And I want to shout out to Michelle Madison, who is a frequent viewer and listener of the program, and thank her for joining us today. I would like to bring up the headline of the Justice Department report and read just a little bit from it, because I think it's important. The police department in Louisville, Kentucky, engaged in a far-ranging pattern of discriminatory and abusive law enforcement practices. This report was released the day before. It was released yesterday, after conducting a 2-year investigation prompted by the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor by the police in 2020. In a damning 90-page report, investigators painted a grim portrait of the Louisville Metro Police Department, detailing a variety of serious, at times shocking, misconduct. They include the use of excessive force, searches based on invalid and so-called no-knock warrants, unlawful car stops, detentions, and harassment of people during street sweeps, particularly people of color, and broad patterns of discrimination against Black people and those with behavioral health problems. That is basically just the tip of the iceberg. But Angela, what are your thoughts about the Justice Department report and the situation in Louisville?
So, with the situation in this report, it actually mirrors, in some aspects, some of the things that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights wrote in their report findings around the Minneapolis Police Department. But with the Louisville ones, the DOJ is, most interested in these allegations of misconduct and brutality that go further beyond a state's laws, but also has the federal laws, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment protections in mind. And they actually do in this report speak to and point to some of the issues of not just excessive force and brutality, but the targeting of African Americans, also the targeting of folks with invalid, and the police department will have invalid warrants, as well as executing search warrants without knocking or announcing. Also, they talk about First Amendment protections on how the Louisville Metro Police Department violates the First Amendment protections of protesters and folks who are, raising their voices against police brutality. So these are some of the similar issues that are brought up by the Department of Human Rights in Minnesota. But these, again, are in Louisville or in Kentucky. So it shows the breadth of misconduct across our country. That's not just one department. It is systemic. They also talk about things like how Louisville Metro Police Department violates Americans with Disabilities Act, with their response to folks with people in behavioral disabilities. And that goes to what a lot of abolitionists, a lot of, reformists are talking about right now in the community. This gives credence to the argument that maybe we need behavioral health specialists in the streets, and not particularly police officers responding to behavioral health issues or folks who have mental health crises, that the police are not the best folks to respond to it. Here, the DOJ is saying that specifically this department violates the Americans with Disabilities Act in their response. So not only that, there's an expectation that there is a way to respond, that the police are supposed to respond. These officers are not doing that even.
I should point out, or I should say, we should point out that these investigations are taking place in 8 cities around the country, including the city of Minneapolis. And pardon me, the Justice Department review of policing in Minneapolis is still underway and has yet to be completed. Breonna Taylor was murdered prior to the death of George Floyd. So the Justice Department investigation of Louisville began prior to the initiation of their review of policing practices in the city of Minneapolis. Angela, let me ask you a personal question. Our program originates from Minneapolis, so this is an important and sensitive topic for us here in the Twin Cities. I'm in the capital city of St. Paul. You were the president of the Minneapolis NAACP, one of the suburbs of St. Paul, I might add with a smile, and had your own experience with the spurious practices of the Minneapolis Police Department in your role as president of the NAACP. Are you at liberty to discuss any of that with our listeners and viewers today?
Well, this is part of the Department of Human Rights, Minnesota Department of Human Rights report. And what is in the report is what I can comment on is that the NAACP, specifically the Minneapolis NAACP, has undergone specific targeting from the Minneapolis Police Department when it comes to surveillance and harassment of online. So creation of almost like blackface type Facebook pages, Instagrams, things like that. And they'll friend or follow the NAACP, and then as a way to keep track of, their future movements and protests, and then will show up in person or send messages to folks in the NAACP, the Urban League, other civil rights leaders. And so this is what was stated in the report for the Human Rights, Department of Human Rights, but then I also have done research with the University of Minnesota Human Rights Initiative and sent to the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights at the United Nations the existence of persistent surveillance and harassment of particularly Black activists and anti-police brutality activists by officers, not just Minneapolis Police Department, but also other law enforcement entities. So that is an issue that we are seeing with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. They did note that this surveillance and harassment is disproportionately targeting Black activists. They noted that there was zero types of this type of surveillance going on for white nationalist organizations, white nationalist activists. And also I need to note that this was outside of an official investigation.
Right. These were Minneapolis police officers pretending to be Black civil rights activists who were trolling, who were following, who were surveilling the leadership of the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department. And this was not done with the authorization of the police department itself. These were the actions of individual officers.
And I will also say doxing, which is sharing personal information. So we have instances of people's personal information being doxed.
And this surveillance was done of peaceful, nonviolent civil rights protesters following the death of George Floyd. Not, you're not a member of any terrorist organization or the Communist Party or anything like that, I trust, as the president of the Minneapolis NAACP, but you yourself were targeted according to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights Studies. So we look forward to the Justice Department take, and I'm certain that it will mirror the Minneapolis Human Rights Department or Minnesota Department of Human Rights report. But the ultimate outcome is to put in place better training, to put in place higher accountability, to put in place initiatives, checks and balances within the department and within the city government in the city of Minneapolis to try and prevent these types of incidents from occurring to peaceful citizens again.
And may I say that, so the Department of Human Rights, that's a specific department within the state of Minnesota, and their findings are tied to state legal action, right? Mm-hmm. The DOJ and all of the 8 cities that they're investigating, when they come up with these findings, those findings are tied to federal legal ramifications. Sure. So these findings is not just going to be a report. There will probably be a consent decree. It'll probably go into a number of it will go to court and have some judges looking at it. So this is also higher than the state's attorney general that we know in Kentucky, who has done very little when it comes to the Breonna Taylor case and the Louisville Metro Police Department case. And so this is above him. This is federal. This is Merrick Garland.
You and I are both members of the Minnesota Dakota Area Conference NAACP Executive Committee, which we refer to as the State Conference for Minnesota, North and South Dakota. And you are very involved in the Minneapolis NAACP, and I am involved in the Capital City chapter of the St. Paul NAACP on Public Safety Committee, Criminal Justice Committee, the Legislative Committee, and working on these areas from the state level all the way down to the local community. The 8 cities include Chicago, they include Detroit, Los Angeles, Miami, major metropolitan areas. They are also initiating a study of Memphis, Tennessee, where, as we're all aware, 5 Black officers were involved in beating to death an unarmed civilian who was stopped for a traffic incident that was not recorded, and there's no way of proving that it actually took place. but the Justice Department reports do indeed have teeth in them and can mandate very specific corrective actions on the part of the municipality and on the part of the local police departments. So let's hope and wait anxiously for the report on the city of Minneapolis and that from the other cities around the country, because these reports serve as a wake-up call to law enforcement, because what one department does reflects on all of the departments across the United States, not just that individual department, because many of these practices are common, are similar, are tied to training and to the performance. And let me say good afternoon to Yoji Sena, who is joining us from Brazil. How are you, brother?
Very well. How are you guys doing?
Good,
It's a
thank you. It's
beautiful day
always good to
today
see
here.
you. We have been discussing the Justice Department report on Louisville, Kentucky, following the death of Breonna Taylor, and Angela and I have been talking about it. Do you have any thoughts from down in Brazil about that report, or about the fact that 8 of these investigations are taking place with local police departments across the United States?
Well, the particular case of Breonna Taylor didn't percolate into the, let's say, black viewer here or the attention of the press here. The case of George Floyd is still remembered. It put Minneapolis. You don't have to describe where Minneapolis, but people has not caught the attention of the local media, the case of Breonna Taylor here in
And
Brazil.
I think her death was approximately 3 months prior to the murder of
Correct.
George Floyd. And it was as though this crescendo was rising, and that the death of George Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back.
That's
And the
true.
fact that it was recorded on video helped.
Yeah, and the last one, Mr. Tyree Nichols.
In Memphis.
Yes,
Hmm.
yeah, this one people is talking about.
Well, it shows that there hasn't been much change, doesn't it?
Well, it is. There is not as much change, and there is so much of mirror of also here what happened here, But here the most difficult to understand is that majority of the police forces are black, and still they do also kill a large proportion of black people. In the
Do
United
they
States,
treat black citizens differently in Brazil?
the police, yes, and when they enter the communities, they generally do shooting, So regularly there's cases of victims of stray bullets on those supposed confrontations with the factions, even though there many cases there are confrontations with the factions, but there is enough cases where relatives of people that are innocent also can document that there was no confrontation. Here there is a big problem with gangs. They are called factions here.
Hmm.
They are dominating, and here they start a phenomena, just started, the phenomena of the drive-by shooting.
What about
That,
body
that
cameras? Do the police in Brazil wear those?
well, the some of them are using.
Larger cities?
Now, the large city here in Bahia, the government, that the government here is left wing, and it's from the same party now as the president of the nation. They're
Mhm.
gonna establish cameras for the police officer. There is no resistance of the police system here, at least in Bahia, about the implementation. In many other cities, there is not a resistance as there was in the United States about the use of cameras on their uniforms. The only resistance that existed was just in the month of January, as the governor of São Paulo took power, and he is from the party of Bolsonaro. He was trying to revert, because São Paulo do already use body cameras and did reduce the mortality of black people and of innocent people.
Okay. I hope you're going to be able to provide us with a perspective on our second topic this afternoon. We're going to be talking about the death of two Americans in Matamoros, Mexico. There were four United States citizens who traveled to Mexico. One of them was planning to undergo cosmetic surgery, and they were caught in a gun battle between two Mexican cartels. Two of the American citizens were killed or have been found dead, and two were found alive and taken to healthcare facilities in the United States for treatment and recovery. And there's been quite a bit of discussion about this. Yoji, are you aware of this incident and
Yes.
some of the ramifications? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was surprised this case to be with Black American citizens that generally, they target white Americans. And the news that I read, they cogitated that could be that the Mexican gangs mistook those people as Haitian gang members. I was
Mhm.
like, wow, um, this was, called my attention, because I was thinking, I think the Haitian gangs are having enough to do in Haiti right now. They are,
Mhm.
making the life of their citizens difficult. And I also doubt that they have a sophistication that to go into the territory of the Mexicans to do what, you know. So, but then might be this veiled attempt to associate us with criminality, because this theory of them to be Haitians, I thought that was a little bit too rich,
So the
Angela?
but
issue is
I think
that
it's very
with
traumatic.
the
Huh?
history of the southern border right now from the 2010s until today, when fewer Haitians got TPS, which is the temporary protected status, there's been actually a number of Haitian immigration to the border of northern Mexico, right, and southern Texas. And so there's actually a large population right now of Haitians in Mexico at the border that are coming from Haiti during these times, as it's become more difficult to enter the U.S. From the traditional means through Miami or through like the Florida type flight or boat type entrances. So there's actually been over 1 million Haitians that have gone to Mexico and that are at the border in Mexico trying to get into the U.S. So to undercut the necessary kind of thinking that the U.S. needs to do around immigration, around their role in Haiti as well, and the criminality to say, that is happening in Haiti is an understatement, because a lot of there are issues with the cartels and Haitian gangs happening right now in Mexico at the border.
Mhm. You also mentioned the healthcare angle on the situation in Matamoros. Angela, speak to that.
Yes, we can't. One aspect of it is that these folks drove down from North Carolina, South Carolina, right? They drove down from their homes in the U.S. to get into access medical care. Now, I think usually folks are like, oh, it's a cosmetic procedure, so it must not matter. But still, the access to healthcare in the US is getting harder and harder to access. And when it comes to, yes, procedures like cosmetic procedures, that's one thing, but there are thousands of Americans who are going down to Mexico for disabilities, for help with things like kneecap surgery, hip replacements, because they are so much more affordable in Mexico. Just like there are folks from Minnesota who might go up to Canada to get their prescriptions filled, right? Because prescriptions are much more affordable in Canada. So this is also an issue of the American healthcare system that we have to analyze as well.
Any other thoughts, Yoji or Angela, about the situation in Mexico?
Well, it is what the sister say that the situation in Mexico also puts on the table the question of affordability in the American health system. That provokes people that are near the northern border to go to Canada, and those in general they go to any sort of procedures in Mexico. I know many people they go to the dentist in Mexico, and there is something that still is not. Actually, I read today kind of a joke. One of those a Brazilian account of Instagram. This woman says, "I went today to the hospital and she received a bill of $21,000, and she was kind of having a fit, like having was a humor stuff, but a medical situation by receiving the bill by, and for example here we is not is not perfect at all, but we do have free health system. So during the pandemic, was very very important to have a national health system. So and the U.S. needs to really think about that because resources are wealth there is in this nation, and it's like, for example, I heard the price of insulin, the Lilly, the laboratory Lilly, agreed to drop 70%. So why there is so these discrepancies between the same product just by crossing a border, you know? For example, here in Brazil, many medications you have a generic version that because it's of the health, the interest of health of the population. So many of like the drug aids, they broke the patents to have generic versions. So even though that in many cases is still in many cases difficult to get, but yes, here there's a very much more benign health system than the U.S. and it's about time to understand, like education, federal universities like University of Minnesota that you have to pay. Here, you don't. Federal universities, you don't pay, even though you can talk about it, but there is free education available in many ways.
One of the things that was unclear to me is whether Matamoros was their ultimate destination or whether it just happened to be along the route that they were traveling to arrive at their ultimate destination, because the State Department had issued warnings to Americans to avoid that particular vicinity because of the gang warfare taking place between the cartels in the Matamoros area. And whether they were caught in a crossfire, whether they were suspected of being Asians or Haitians or the enemy, so to speak, is still being developed. They did arrest one of the suspects. There was one person guarding the location, the shed, where the two Americans who were still alive were being held. And in rescuing the two Americans, they did capture and arrest the individual who was a member of the cartel who was responsible for guarding them in the shed in which they were being held captive. But why don't we move on to our third topic, which involves two specials which were broadcast last week. The first was a Chris Rock special called Selective Outrage. And by way of background information, Netflix paid Chris Rock's $40 million for two one-hour specials, the first of which was entitled Tambourine a couple of years ago, which received very little fanfare or, you know, positive reviews. They have since re-edited that special and expanded it. And this particular special, Selected Outrage, was broadcast Saturday night with a half-hour live program before the 1 hour comedy, and then a live half-hour wrap-up following the comedy. So it was really 2 hours of prime airtime on Netflix last Saturday from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock Central Time. And I regret the fact that I have to admit that I turned it on and watched it. And I will say from the outset that I refused to turn it off until it got better, and watched it until the very end. But at the same time, last week there was another comedy special featuring Marlon Wayans, one of the Wayan brothers. You know, a family of talented stand-up comedians, actors, directors, and Marlon Wayans spent the entire hour of his special attacking Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Chris Rock, which was, um, I just don't have the metaphor or the adjective to really describe it. But before I go into a lengthy condemnation of both, I'd like to know if either of you had the opportunity to see either of those specials and would like to comment. Angela, did you get a chance to see it?
So I didn't watch the specials, but I was following the Twitter debates.
Okay,
And so as it goes,
there
I
was
did.
quite a bit.
There was quite a bit. And I grew up on the Everybody Hates Chris show,
Hmm.
which was a comedy show that, you know, as Chris Rock as a young man growing up. And yeah, so I had that. And then like the Good Hair documentary that he did, those were kind of
Hmm.
my initial getting to know Chris Rock. And of late, hadn't had seen his specials, anything. I was actually surprised last year when he had been chosen to host the Oscars. And then, of course, I was surprised when Will Smith decided to get up on stage and slap him after he did comment on Jada Pinkett Smith's balding, which she has a disease that, you know, causes her to lose her
Alopecia.
hair.
I think
Yes,
it's called alopecia.
alopecia.
Alopecia. Hmm.
And so, yeah, I had seen all of those. And so I'm still gonna watch Emancipation. That's on my list. Will Smith's movie. That'll be what I say.
Chris Rock indicated that the only reason he watches Emancipation is to see Will Smith get whooped. But Yoji, did you have a chance either to read about or see either of
Yeah,
the two
I've
specials and the
been
controversy?
reading the repercussion. Um, the funny thing is, I liked that show. What's Everybody Hates Chris,
Hmm.
right? I liked, and but it took many years to associate that who is behind this Chris Rock because I really I'm not very fond of his fondue, you know, and I don't think him to be funny. His presence and things like that. So and he's that show also is very famous here. It's still on rerun in Portuguese. You know that is very funny. And I for some reason I know my opinion about all this controversy between them. Um, I think that in the line that one since before that I didn't find Chris Rock very funny, and I didn't find him any bit and in certain way I understand Mr. Will Smith for maybe he was in a weak moment for doing that in with that audience, but I think any regular guy with emotions would do something similar if you are talking, making fun of your wife, more knowing that your wife has a medical condition.
Sure.
So, and Chris Rock is clearly also banking after that controversy. He became in a kind of a victim position, and he has a lot more uh, sympathetic eyes on him, and he's banking on that. But I don't think between the two, the talent, I think Mr. Will Smith has a little bit more than him.
Yeah.
So that is is my opinion.
One of the people who tunes into the conversation is Michelle Madison, who lives in Baltimore and could have gone to see the performance that Chris Rock did live because it was broadcast from Baltimore. And she indicates that instead she chose to watch it on Netflix and was not really impressed. The Marlon Wayans special and the Chris Rock special had two things in common, in my opinion. Okay. They were embarrassing, they were vulgar, they were inappropriate, and they were totally unnecessary. And I think that my immediate comment that I refused to turn it off until it got better and had to witness it to the entire end. In fact, I watched half of it on Saturday night and turned it off. And then, in fairness, went back Saturday morning and watched the second half of it, which was even more disgusting than the first half because Will Smith talked about Jada Pinkett's sex life and their marriage and their children and a lot of stuff that I really didn't feel deserved to be broadcast nationally or internationally was none of their business. But I think it set back black entertainers and black people light years because it was so unpleasant, so embarrassing that I did not find it funny at all, and it actually caused me some physical displeasure, just witnessing it because my grandmother used to say, boy, whatever you do not only affects you, it affects everybody who looks like you, so you really need to be careful what kind of images you project. And that's real, not just for us, but for people who are in the media, people who are considered celebrities. And I was offended to think that Netflix would not only air the special, but would pay $40 million for two of them. And I happened to watch the other one when I was trying to find more information about this one and was equally unimpressed. But referring to black women with the B word and just the negative comments that were made in general, the hoes and the B word and some of the other language and stuff, the N word. And I want to tell this story because I'll be 75 this year. So my granddaughter says I'm a VOG, and it's not a very original gangster. It means very old guy. Okay. Maya Angelou was on a program with a young rapper who repeatedly was using the N word, but he was saying nigga and he was saying nigga. He wasn't using the word with an ER on the end, but a UH or an AH. And she explained to him that she had a jar in her pantry that had a skull and crossbones on the label and asked if he knew what was in it. And he said, well, that's poison. Don't put that in any of your food. And she said, if I take the contents of that jar and I pour it into another container that has flowers or a rainbow or children in a meadow, is it any less poisonous than it was in the original vessel? Okay. And that was her take on, you can't take the N word and try and glorify it or reclaim it or assign some positive image to it when, for more than 400 years, it has been used to denigrate, to humiliate, to subjugate, and to place people beneath the very bottom, okay? I mean, under the floor, not on the floor. And that's the way I feel about comedy. I like political comedy. I like satire. I like imitations. I think that when it is well done, it is very entertaining, but it can also be very harmful, very damaging, and as I said, rude, vulgar, nasty, and inappropriate. And so for Marlon Wayans to spend an hour castigating Chris Rock, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Will Smith, and talk about nothing else for an entire hour in a special other than the slap that was heard around the world, talked about the kids, that they were from another planet, and just, it was entirely negative. And then for Chris Rock to spend the final 10 minutes of his 1 hour special belittling and criticizing Will and Jada Smith because Will Smith slapped him. And he said that Jada Pinkett Smith demanded that he boycott the Oscars several years ago because Will Smith did not get an Oscar for the movie Concussion, which I thought was very well done, very informative about CTE degrees that football players get from all of the concussions that they have while they're engaged in the sport. But Will Smith, Chris Rock went ahead anyway, and that he tried to give Will Smith credit and attack him at the same time. It was very hypocritical. But I really resented Netflix airing it, paying that much money for it, and I'm almost embarrassed to have a conversation with people of other races and ask them if they saw it, what they thought, and what their impression is of our race as a whole as a result of having witnessed that. And so I think that controversy is going to go on and on. I lay some of the blame at Dave Chappelle's feet, okay, because he has done such a masterful job of political satire and commentary and critical analysis that I think other comedians are making a failed attempt to try and imitate Dave Chappelle and not doing it very successfully. And I have to admit that I have a problem with Dave Chappelle's use of the N-word every other sentence in all of his specials and stand-up comedies. And I think that these people collectively have brilliant minds. They have a tremendous opportunity. They have become filthy rich as a result of their craft, and they have developed a massive following, and could and they would take issue that it's an art form and that they have the right to say it, First Amendment, free speech, etc. But I think they also have a real missed opportunity if they don't also recall what Marcus Garvey said: "Up you mighty race and accomplish what you will," and use that platform to at least, the only things you keep are the things you share, and hopefully you can share some positive information through that vehicle of comedy and satire and imitation that will help people improve their lives and be better instruments for living together with other people, particularly other people within our own race. And I found that to be entirely missing in both of those specials last week. So there you have my 2 cents about Chris Rock and Marlon Wayans and their recent specials. And the Chris Rock special is now the #1 program on Netflix. And people attach the same kind of significance and importance to that as they do the NBA or the NFL, as they used to attach to the Black church. And I think that's the real unfortunate reality related to that type of entertainment, if that's the way you want to define it or label it. Do either of you have any further thoughts on the topic in general, the responsibility of Black artists, Netflix paying $40 million for it? Michelle Madison says, well, Netflix is in it for the money. They have no problem conveying negativity in the Black community. Unfortunately, it sells.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but let me.
I would say, there's an idea of punching up and punching down when we're talking about comedy, satire, as well as, political commentary. what group, right, are you basically putting on display for public, you know, satirization and humiliation, and at what cost, for what audience? And I think that what you're talking about here, particularly when it stems back to a joke that he made about a woman with a disability, a skin, a skin disease, right, a woman with alopecia, a Black woman with alopecia, there's an aspect of, why are you always punching down Chris Rock? Does that make you feel powerful? And for whom are you doing it? You're doing it to a lot of white audiences. And I do find a problem with that,
Do you
Black
think it?
women
Do you
in
think,
society.
Angela? Do you think it borders on self-hatred?
I don't know. I couldn't talk as much about that. I do think he's still traumatized from something. This seems personal on some aspects, some levels, especially Jada Pinkett Smith. She
Yes.
said that he's been talking about her for 30 years. So it seems personal on some aspects, just like I think like Piers Morgan making fun of Meghan Markle, constantly always in the news saying disparaging remarks about her is personal, right? So
Chris
some of these
Rock.
things,
Chris Rock took plenty of shots at her in a
yeah,
special as well.
these are not neutral. And I just really wish that we lived in a world where the jokes were funny, and then also that it wasn't Black women who are always the punching bag.
Yoji, you were going to comment?
Yeah, and exactly, and it's like she is really the victim, and these are all three other males who people are talking about, and who, in certain way, are benefiting from all this, commotion. Chris Rock, uh, uh, Wayne, Will Smith himself, and this other one, Marlon Wayans, that then did a show about the episode of about them three. So, and the real sad stuff is they are started by somebody making fun of Jada having alopecia. That it's a very little compassion. Very overall, it's very little compassion, very little positivity, um, and then they claim to, in a certain way, wanting to lead our community into certain changes, But to me, the most sad is that everybody is talking. The joke is always about Jada, but everybody else is about talking about these other males, and her is kind of forgot about. What about how she's doing now? Whatever, the focus become principally and Chris Rock selling himself as the victim of the ira of Will Smith, you
Is there
know.
there's a history of minstrelling, right? Of making fun
And
of Black folk even when you
yeah,
are Black, right? Like it's a
and as
history
you
of
say, it seems to
minstrelling.
be something personal. Chris Rock has some beef that has been lingering for long. The only thing that he did actually that I like is that movie American in Paris. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, I
That
I
where
have.
saw that. It's good.
he
It's good.
marries a white woman, but
A
it's a
white
little
French
bit
woman.
funny.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. But otherwise, I think he's also and very ugly. His face is very as a caricature of something, and that was his moment of having his revival. It's gonna last for a few more years, and I think the acting talent of Will Smith will prevail
Yeah.
eventually too.
Leah Jean Denley, who has a master's in business administration, shares with us her thought that unfortunately the lines are blurring between politics, entertainment, social, racial injustice, and moral codes. And I think
I
she's
agree.
absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that this was also one of the issues with around conversations around DeSantis and also conversations around Trump, is that everybody is so unserious. Everything's a joke, but people's lives are at stake. When it comes to like the Don't Say Gay bill, or like the Stop Woke Act that's happening here, people are out here making jokes when you need to be at the state legislature voting. These are very serious things that are moving our country towards fascism, and y'all want to joke about it. And I get it. Humor is a way to spread public awareness and to, you know, get people knowledgeable about the subjects, but also that only goes so far, right? And then once people are desensitized to these subjects happening and feel like they have no power in it, that also I see that happening with sometimes when we joke too much, when we're not serious about these subjects. You know, you do have power. You do have power when it comes to, you know, the way our legislature, the way our elected officials move and act. Unfortunately, that power kind of only goes so far when you're making a joke on Twitter.
Yep. We have just a couple of minutes left. What I would like to do is remind our listeners and viewers that they can go to their YouTube channel and subscribe to receive notifications when Conversations with Al McFarland are live. Look for Insight News Minnesota. Look for Conversations with Al McFarland. And please subscribe to this channel, to this broadcast. It is carried on the website of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the trade group for all of the black papers in the United States. They carry it on their website. It is also carried on the Insight Facebook page. It's carried on KFAI 1 or 2 days a week. So it's difficult for people to say that they don't have access to it or can't plug into it. And I'd like to think that the conversation is really a level above what takes place by people who are not informed or who really don't have an investment in, putting up the proper analysis on events that are occurring in our community and what impact they have on our lives.
So Yasmin says in the chat, says, do you think comedy is used as a way to purposefully or strategically desensitize? And one thing I would just say to that is that, you know, DeSantis doesn't care if you're tweeting about him. You know, Trump doesn't care. What they do care about is if you show up in their face or if you vote them out, right? And that's what you definitely need to do, as well as there is very real marketing tactics that are around, you know, hate campaigns. So, you know, I think about the Little Nas X and Mischief. They had released a shoe that had, you know, blood in it. So it was called Bloody Shoes. And so it was purposefully released to get a reaction, a negative reaction, to get people talking. And I do think that that's being utilized a lot in a lot of different avenues, politically and in the entertainment business, as a way to just garner attention. And, you know, unfortunately, there are a lot of entertainers now. I was talking to someone at the salon, right? I love black salons. And we were talking about how there's a lot of entertainers who will utilize devil imagery, Satan imagery, not because of anything they're related to the Church of Satan or anything like that, but just honestly to garner attention. And, you know, take it as you will. But it's sad that that will make you more money than, you know, standing up in your rights and who you are and having a moral compass. It's sad that, you know, invoking Satan will get you more attention than, or making fun of black women who will get you more attention than actually honing your craft or being a stand-up, you know, person. It's sad.
Yeah. Yoji, is comedy different in Brazil than what we have in the United States, having been in both places?
Well, in certain way, we here um, always there's a tradition of having comic shows on national TV. In general, historically has been dumbing humor that works on regional stereotypes, homophobia. You know, the humor in general, the popular humor in Latin America in general, are, I would say, of very low quality. Nowadays, there is an emergency of stand-up comedians in the mode of the United States. Like nowadays, stand-up comedy clubs here, and you find very intelligent, articulated humor. That is sometimes good satires or analysis of the reality. And there is a very strong, I would say, harvest of black comedians, women and men, especially where I'm from. And they have a special that's called Black Humor. If you guys can look, it's in Portuguese, but it does relates a lot of takes in humor a lot of the racism, how we suffer racism in here in Brazil, and they make a very intelligent pushback in the form of humor.
Okay.
So yeah, humor differs a little bit according to the place, to the culture, and I think a lot about what the background of that nation is. So here, for example, sitcoms like in the style of the is in the United States, it doesn't work well as a comedy. The time and the lines, because the humor here many times it got to be but crass and
Okay.
shocking
All
to
right.
everybody laugh.
On that note, I'm Youssef M. Janney, sitting in for Al McFarlane today. I'd like to thank Yogi Senna and Angela Rose Myers for joining with us for a very stimulating conversation. God bless and take care.
Ciao, ciao.